From the earliest days of human society, the urge to exchange, whether objects, favors, or information, has profoundly shaped the world. Long before cities rose or empires dreamed of distant horizons, people traded. They bartered food, tools, and ornaments, forging connections that would one day link continents. Barter, the direct exchange of goods and services, was not merely a primitive precursor to money, it has coexisted alongside monetary economies, even into the 21st century. Today's barter is more efficient, but its roots stretch deep into prehistory, revealing much about the evolution of human society. In these early times, the landscape itself played a decisive role in shaping how, where, and why people traded. Geography, with its rivers, fertile plains, and mountain passes, set the stage for the first patterns of exchange. Rivers like the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, and the Indus were more than just sources of water. They were natural highways, guiding people and their goods along routes that would eventually become the arteries of civilization. Fertile soil and favorable climates enabled the growth of agriculture, allowing communities to produce surplus food. This surplus fostered economic stability and freed some individuals to specialize in crafts, administration, or trade, laying the groundwork for the division of labor that would define the world's first urban centers. Archaeological evidence from sites around the globe helps us piece together these ancient networks. In North America, for instance, the movements of Paleo-Indians were shaped by the pursuit of resources, but they also engaged in trade and social interaction as they traveled. Archaeologists have traced the origins of non-local objects such as certain types of stone or shells, using provenance studies and stylistic analyses, providing compelling evidence for early trade and exchange. These methods reveal a world where the movement of goods was closely tied to the movement of people, ideas, and cultural practices. As societies grew more complex, so too did their systems of exchange. The transition from simple bartering to more organized forms of trade was gradual, influenced by changing social structures and the emergence of administrative tools. In ancient Egypt, for example, redistributive systems of barter flourished, with surplus goods collected and then redistributed by central authorities. Even here, a medium of exchange began to emerge, marking an important step toward the development of money. The Incas in Peru also relied on intricate redistributive networks, demonstrating that diverse societies found unique ways to balance the challenges and opportunities of exchange. The invention of money, however, was neither inevitable nor solely a response to the inefficiencies of barter. Scholars have long debated the origins of money. Some argue that it arose to facilitate trade between strangers and across borders, especially in long-distance trade networks, while others emphasize the role of state taxation and authority. Evidence from pre-state societies suggests that commodity money, such as shells or metals, often circulated in these networks, making it easier to conduct exchanges with people outside one's immediate community. Over time, these systems increased the efficiency of trade, enabling goods to move farther and faster than ever before. Long-distance trade, as early as the Bronze Age, left its mark on the archaeological record. Around 3000 BCE, merchants carried goods between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, a remarkable feat given the technological limitations of the time. These journeys were not undertaken lightly. Early trade focused on imperishable and valuable items such as spices, textiles, and precious metals, goods that justified the risks and effort of long-distance travel. Cities that controlled or specialized in these commodities grew wealthy, becoming focal points for commerce and cultural exchange. Waterways were crucial to these early networks. Rivers, lakes, and coastlines offered relatively safe and efficient means of transport, especially before the widespread use of wheeled vehicles. The domestication of animals like horses and camels further revolutionized trade, enabling heavier and more frequent shipments overland. The invention of the wheel around 5000 BCE was a significant advancement, making it possible to move larger loads across greater distances. Eventually, societies such as the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans would develop extensive maritime trade networks. But even in these early periods, ships and boats were vital for ferrying goods along rivers and across seas. The city of Kalba in present-day United Arab Emirates offers a vivid glimpse into these early exchanges. Excavations there have uncovered evidence of a trade route stretching from India to Mesopotamia and Arabia around 2500 BCE. Kalba functioned as a hub for both economic and cultural exchange, with signs of administrative techniques and craft production reflecting the sophistication of these ancient networks. Such hubs were not isolated. Instead, they formed nodes in a web of commerce that, over time, would come to link the entire Eurasian continent. The development of trade was not only an economic phenomenon, but also a social and cultural one. Exchange often served to strengthen social bonds rather than simply generate wealth. In many early economies, religious, ethnic, and geographic factors shaped what could be traded, with whom, and under what circumstances. Trade offered a means of cementing alliances, sharing innovations, and even spreading new religious beliefs. The movement of goods was inseparable from the movement of ideas and cultural practices, a process that continues to shape human societies to this day. As trade expanded, so did the need for new tools and technologies. The rise of urban centers like Babylon and Alexandria was closely linked to the growth of commerce. These cities became magnets for traders, artisans, and administrators, and their prosperity depended on their ability to manage the flow of goods and information. The development of accounting and writing systems was pivotal. Record-keeping became essential for tracking inventories, transactions, and taxation. These innovations not only facilitated trade, but also laid the foundations for more complex legal and economic systems. Throughout this era, geography remained a powerful force. The location of rivers, deserts, mountains, and seacoasts determined which areas flourished and which struggled to participate in broader networks of exchange. Civilizations such as Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and China rose in regions where the natural environment supported both agriculture and trade. Their boundaries and interactions were shaped as much by the lay of the land as by the ambitions of their leaders. It is important to note that while much is known about the broad patterns of early trade, significant gaps remain, especially regarding the specifics of who traded what, when, and how. Archaeological evidence continues to shed light on these mysteries, but many details are lost to time. What is clear, however, is that the drive to exchange, to seek out new resources, to share surplus, and to connect with distant peoples was a defining feature of early human societies. As the centuries passed, local barter evolved into vast networks spanning continents. Trade brought not only wealth but also new ideas, technologies, and cultures. It laid the groundwork for the rise of cities, the formation of states, and the birth of civilizations. The earliest trade routes, shaped by geography and human ingenuity, form the foundations of a connected world, a legacy that endures in ever-changing form to the present day. Across the ancient world, the rise of major trade routes transformed the destinies of entire civilizations. These arteries of commerce did more than move goods from one marketplace to another. They carried ideas, technologies, religions, and even plagues, weaving distant societies into a single, ever-evolving tapestry. In the classical and medieval periods, several iconic networks emerged, each shaped by geography and necessity, and each leaving a profound mark on the course of human history. Perhaps the most celebrated of these was the Silk Road, a sprawling web of overland routes that, for more than 15 centuries, linked the heart of China with distant Europe. The journey began in the city of Xi'an, winding through the deserts and mountain passes of Central Asia, skirting the great empires of Persia and Byzantium, and finally reaching the Mediterranean shores. This was not a single road, but a shifting network of paths, carefully chosen to avoid natural obstacles and political dangers. Along the way, goods such as Chinese silk, lustrous jade, delicate porcelain, and fragrant tea flowed westward, while horses, glassware, fine textiles, and later spices traveled east. Trade was not limited to luxury items. Everyday commodities and utilitarian wares journeyed in the same caravans, though it was silk, light and precious, that gave the route its name. The Silk Road was more than a conduit for merchandise. It was a channel for the exchange of knowledge, technology, religion, and art. As travelers paused in the bustling caravanserais and markets of oasis cities, they exchanged not only objects, but ideas. Buddhist monks carried their faith from India into China and beyond. Islamic scholars and merchants introduced new mathematical concepts, medical knowledge, and artistic styles into Central Asia. Through these interactions, cities like Samarkand and Bukhara blossomed into cosmopolitan centers, drawing people of many languages and creeds. Official histories and travelogues from the time, some penned by Chinese emissaries or Arab geographers, offer glimpses into this world of mingling cultures and constant movement. The route's fame was cemented in the European imagination by the account of Marco Polo, who traveled from Venice to the court of Kublai Khan in the late 13th century. Though not the first to make the crossing, his writings opened his contemporaries' eyes to the wonders and wealth of the East. However, the Silk Road was also a pathway for less welcome travelers. Scholars believe that the same networks that brought prosperity also carried the deadly bacteria responsible for the Black Death, a reminder of the double-edged nature of connectivity. The fortunes of the Silk Road rose and fell with the empires it traversed. The Mongol conquest of the 13th century, for example, briefly unified the vast expanse from China to the Mediterranean under a single authority, reviving the route and making it safer for caravans. Yet by the 15th century, the heyday of the Silk Road was drawing to a close. European traders, eager for direct access to the riches of the East, shifted their efforts to the sea, seeking faster and more secure maritime routes. While the Silk Road is renowned for its overland journeys, the Indian Ocean emerged as another vital pathway connecting East and West. As early as the Classical period, the waters between Rome, India, Arabia, and East Africa teemed with ships bearing amphorae, spices, textiles, and ceramics. Archaeological finds, such as torpedo jars and other distinctive containers, trace these ancient exchanges. The rise of the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates in the medieval era further invigorated this vast maritime world, drawing together merchants from the Persian Gulf, the Swahili coast, India, and even China. The secret to the Indian Ocean's commercial success lay in the predictability of the monsoon winds, which allowed sailors to time their voyages with remarkable accuracy. For centuries, ships set out from ports like Calicut, Aden, and Zanzibar, laden with Chinese porcelain and silk, East African gold and ivory, Southeast Asian spices, and Indian cottons. Trading cities along the coast became vibrant hubs where languages mingled and architectural styles blended. The Swahili coast, in particular, stood as a testament to the power of cross-cultural exchange. Its towns reflected a synthesis of African, Arab, Persian, and Asian influences, visible in the local language, religious practices, and the very stones of its buildings. Maritime trade was not merely about moving goods. It fostered the transfer of technologies, such as advances in navigation and shipbuilding, and the spread of religious beliefs. Islam, for example, found adherents along the coasts of East Africa, India, and Southeast Asia, carried by merchants and Sufi mystics. Accounts from great travelers like Ibn Battuta and Zheng He, though filtered through their own perspectives, offer invaluable insight into the cosmopolitan nature of these trading worlds. Far to the west and south, the vast Sahara Desert presented a formidable barrier between the Mediterranean and the rich kingdoms of West Africa. Yet, beginning in prehistoric times and reaching its peak from the 8th to the early 17th centuries, the trans-Saharan trade network flourished. The Sahara was often likened to a sea of sand, and it was the Berbers masters of the desert who led caravans of camels, the so-called ships of the desert. These caravans, sometimes stretching for miles, navigated the perilous dunes, guided by stars and the wisdom of generations. At the heart of this exchange was gold, mined in the forests and rivers south of the desert and coveted by the Islamic states of North Africa. Salt, equally precious for preserving food, traveled in the opposite direction, hewn from great mines in the desert's heart. Alongside these staples moved ivory, spices, textiles, weapons, and enslaved people commodities that shaped the destinies of entire peoples. The trans-Saharan trade brought great wealth to kingdoms like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, whose rulers controlled access to the goldfields and taxed the flow of goods. The legendary city of Timbuktu rose as a center not only of commerce but of learning, attracting scholars from across the Islamic world. The impact of these exchanges extended far beyond economics. The spread of Islam was both a cause and a consequence of trans-Saharan trade. As merchants and scholars crossed the desert, they brought with them not just wares but new religious ideas, legal systems, and the Arabic script. Over time, Islam took root in West Africa, blending with local customs and reshaping societies. The demand for West African gold in North Africa and beyond drove further trade and, in turn, further conversions. Meanwhile, in Europe and across the Mediterranean, trade networks flourished in their own right. Weekly markets and grand fairs became fixtures of medieval life. Improvements in transportation and banking allowed merchants to move luxury goods, textiles, gems, spices across vast distances. Artistic styles and techniques crossed borders as readily as merchandise, enriching both Islamic and European traditions. Through all these highways of civilization, the world grew more interconnected. Networks of exchange from the 13th to 15th centuries saw not only the movement of tangible goods but also the transfer of ideas, technologies, and beliefs. Innovations in finance, governance, religion, medicine, and transportation traveled along these routes, profoundly shaping the societies they touched. By the end of the medieval era, the world's great trade routes had forged a new kind of global consciousness. From the Silk Road's bustling caravan towns to the teeming ports of the Indian Ocean and the camel caravans of the Sahara, these networks laid the groundwork for the modern age of exploration and exchange. Their legacy endures in the mingled languages, faiths, and artistic traditions of the lands they once joined, and in the very idea that the movement of people, goods, and ideas can change the world. Imagine the world at the twilight of the 15th century. The great overland arteries that had long pulsed with the exchange of goods and ideas, The fabled Silk Road and the caravan trails of Central Asia were contracting. Political and economic changes were closing these traditional routes to Asia, casting uncertainty over established patterns of trade. In this climate, with Europe's appetite for luxury goods undiminished but its access increasingly blocked, a new era began, the Age of Exploration. This was a period that would not simply redraw maps, but fundamentally alter the rhythms of commerce, the destinies of continents, and the very fabric of human society. For centuries, the world's most coveted luxuries, silks, spices, porcelains, and gems, had flowed from the bustling markets of China, India, and Southeast Asia. These regions, rich in resources and skilled in crafts, exerted a magnetic pull on European consumers. Yet Europe itself was relatively poor compared to the civilizations of Asia and the Middle East. The demand for pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and the marvels of Chinese manufacture only grew more intense as tales of distant splendor circulated through the courts and merchant houses of Spain, Portugal, and beyond. This longing for wealth, the lure of the unfamiliar, and the desire for direct access to these treasures propelled European states to seek new paths across the seas. Although the 1492 voyage of Christopher Columbus is often marked as the beginning of the Age of Discovery, earlier ventures, some now lost to history, had already hinted at the possibilities and perils of venturing beyond the known world. What distinguished this new wave of exploration was its scale, its ambition, and the profound transformation it would bring. Advances in navigation, shipbuilding, and map-making, many inherited and adapted from earlier civilizations, made it possible for Portuguese and Spanish mariners to brave the unknown. The compass, the astrolabe, and improved hull designs allowed ships to travel farther, faster, and with greater safety, setting the stage for the first true transoceanic trade networks. With these technological advantages, European powers launched their ships into the Atlantic and around the southern tip of Africa, establishing sea routes that, for the first time, connected Europe directly to the riches of Asia and the newly encountered Americas. The Portuguese, forging cautiously along the coast of Africa, opened maritime links with India and beyond. The Spanish, following the path set by Columbus, encountered complex and advanced civilizations in the Americas, initiating a process that would ultimately span the globe. This was not merely a story of daring voyages and new lands. It was a revolution in the very nature of trade itself. The so-called Atlantic Revolution redirected the world's economic currents, as trade routes that once threaded through overland empires now looped across the oceans. Silver from the Americas, gold from Africa, spices and textiles from Asia, all began to flow along new maritime highways, reshaping economies and societies on a planetary scale. The Age of Exploration marked the emergence of a globalized economy where the fates of continents became inextricably linked. The motivations for this burst of exploration were not purely material, though the pursuit of wealth was certainly a driving force. European explorers and settlers were animated by curiosity, the promise of new opportunities, and the hope of glory. Yet underlying these ambitions was a desire to circumvent existing mercantile networks, to break the monopolies held by middlemen in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and to claim for themselves the profits of direct trade. This quest for new sea routes was, in part, a response to necessity, as the closure of old paths forced a reckoning with the unknown. But the consequences of these voyages extended far beyond the calculations of merchants and monarchs. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, Africa, and Asia, they encountered societies as dynamic and diverse as their own. These indigenous communities had long adapted to their environments and developed intricate systems of trade, governance, and belief. Initial contact often involved hardship and negotiation, as explorers mapped unfamiliar territories and established tenuous networks with local leaders. Over time, these relationships evolved, sometimes marked by cooperation and mutual benefit, but more often by conflict, conquest, and profound disruption. The arrival of Europeans set in motion changes that would reverberate for centuries. For indigenous societies, the consequences were often catastrophic. The spread of diseases to which local populations had no immunity decimated communities across the Americas, leading to population collapse on an unprecedented scale. Land was seized or irrevocably altered, and traditional ways of life were upended by new patterns of trade, competition for resources, and the imposition of foreign rule. While trade with Europeans sometimes brought new goods and opportunities, it also introduced dependencies and inequalities that left many indigenous peoples vulnerable to exploitation and displacement. Nowhere were these impacts more devastating than in the emergence of the Atlantic slave trade. As European colonization expanded, the demand for labor in the Americas grew insatiable. This led to the forced displacement of millions of Africans whose societies were destabilized by violence, population loss, and the wrenching effects of the slave trade. The profits generated by this brutal system enriched European powers and fueled further expansion, but the human cost was staggering, a legacy of pain and injustice that endures to this day. Even as devastation unfolded in some regions, the age of exploration also brought new forms of interconnection. The Columbian Exchange, as historians describe it, transferred not just goods but plants, animals, people, and diseases between the old and new worlds. Crops like maize, potatoes, and tomatoes travel from the Americas to Europe, Asia, and Africa, transforming diets and agricultural practices. Horses, cattle, and wheat moved in the other direction, reshaping landscapes and livelihoods. This global mingling, sometimes productive, sometimes destructive, marked a turning point in human history as societies everywhere were forced to adapt to an ever more interconnected world. By the 19th century, the patterns set in motion during the Age of Exploration had matured into a global system of trade based on mercantilism. European colonial powers, having established vast empires, controlled the flow of goods and wealth between continents. China, India, and Southeast Asia remained important sources of luxury goods, but the balance of power had shifted decisively toward Europe. The scramble for Africa in the late 19th century, a further extension of this global competition, shattered old political arrangements and left a legacy of fragmentation and conflict. The integration of national economies into a single global system, what we now call globalization, was the ultimate outcome of these centuries of expansion and exchange. The Age of Exploration, with its technological innovations, its mingling of cultures, and its tragic human costs, laid the foundations for the world we inhabit today. Trade became not just a matter of local or regional importance, but a force that could unite or divide continents, enrich or impoverish entire peoples, and shape the course of history itself. The evolution of trade routes during this era was not simply a matter of geography or economics, but a drama of ambition, encounter, and transformation on a truly global scale. The hum of a locomotive, the steady churn of a steamship, the distant whir of an airplane. These are the sounds of a world in motion, shaped by the relentless evolution of trade routes. As the modern era unfolded, the very concept of a trade route was transformed by forces unimaginable to the merchants of ancient times or the explorers of the early modern period. The dawn of the Industrial Revolution marked a profound turning point. Society shifted from agrarian economies rooted in local production to industrial powerhouses driven by mechanized manufacturing. This transformation was not limited to any single region. Beginning in Britain and spreading outward to Europe and the United States, the Industrial Revolution changed not just how goods were made, but also how they moved. Factories produced products at a scale and speed previously unthinkable, and these goods demanded new, more efficient means of reaching distant markets. Railways soon crisscrossed continents, shrinking the vastness of nations and connecting distant cities with steel networks. Steam-powered ships traced new arteries across the oceans, no longer bound by the unpredictable winds that had governed maritime schedules for centuries. For the first time, raw materials could be transported from the interior of one continent, loaded onto massive steamships, and delivered to factories half a world away with a reliability and regularity that transformed global economics. These advances did more than open new markets. They created a truly interconnected world economy. Mechanized production allowed goods to be made cheaply and in bulk, but it was the revolution in transport that enabled their global distribution. Yet the same technologies that created opportunity also brought new forms of exploitation, especially in regions that became colonies, places where industrial needs dictated the extraction of resources and the reshaping of societies to serve distant demands. As industrialization spread, the very nature of trade was redefined. The rise of the factory system, with its regimented labor and mass production, was mirrored by innovations in logistics and transportation. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw railways and steamships reach nearly every corner of the globe, their routes often following the contours of imperial interests. The world's major ports became hubs in an ever-expanding network, their docks and warehouses bustling as goods flowed in and out. Cotton, coal, manufactured wares, and foodstuffs. The movement of these goods was no longer slow and unpredictable. Timetables and schedules brought a new sense of order and expectation. International shipping, once reliant on ancient maritime routes, evolved through these innovations. Steam-powered vessels replaced sailing ships, offering greater speed and capacity. In time, containerization would further revolutionize shipping, allowing goods to be packed efficiently and transferred seamlessly from ship to rail to truck. But the story of modern trade routes is not just about ships and railways. The 20th and 21st centuries have witnessed a technological transformation as revolutionary as the arrival of steam and steel. Advances in digital technology, automation, and blockchain are now shaping the logistics of global trade, bringing greater transparency and efficiency to shipping and supply chains. The evolution of the shipping industry reflects this shift. What began as a triumph of industrial engineering has become a showcase for digital innovation, where automated ports and real-time data sharing streamline the movement of millions of containers each year. Railways, too, have entered a new era. Autonomous trains and the use of digital twins, a virtual replica of physical assets, are transforming how freight and passengers move across countries. These technologies enable real-time management and monitoring of vast networks, making it possible to optimize routes, reduce delays, and adapt to changing conditions with unprecedented speed. Multimodal logistics, the integration of sea, air, rail, and road transport, has become a defining feature of the modern trade system. Goods now move seamlessly from ship to train to truck to airplane, their journeys tracked by sophisticated digital systems that provide instant updates and interventions. This integration brings not only efficiency but also resilience, as shipments can be rerouted in response to disruptions or shifting demand. Air transportation has become essential to global commerce. The invention of the airplane added an entirely new dimension to trade, defined by speed and reach. Air freight and high-speed rail networks make it possible to deliver perishable goods and high-value items across continents in hours or days rather than weeks or months. Airports, once simple airfields, are now complex hubs where automation, digital information sharing, and artificial intelligence manage the flow of goods and people. The ability to rapidly transport products worldwide ensures not just swift delivery, but also the maintenance of quality, an essential factor in industries from technology to food. Yet, for all the promise of technology and integration, global trade routes remain deeply vulnerable to the currents of geopolitics. The modern world is a tapestry of alliances, rivalries, and shifting priorities, and these tensions can profoundly affect the movement of goods. Geopolitical disputes disrupt supply chains, increase costs, and force businesses to rethink their strategies. Supply chain analytics, powered by digital tools, have become crucial in helping companies respond to these disruptions, offering real-time insights and the ability to adapt. The effect of political alignment is measurable. A 10% rise in geopolitical distance between trading partners can reduce bilateral trade by 2%. In recent years, trade has grown more slowly than the global economy as a whole, a trend shaped by rising protectionism, trade wars, and the strategic reconfiguration of trade relationships. The concept of friendshoring, aligning supply chains with politically friendly nations, reflects the ongoing influence of geopolitics on global commerce. Major shifts in the global landscape, such as the rivalry between the United States and China, or conflicts in the Middle East, reshape the patterns of trade, closing some routes and opening others. Businesses and governments alike must remain agile, reconfiguring supply lines in response to new realities. In this environment, the role of digital technology becomes even more pronounced. Digital transformation is fundamentally changing how businesses operate across borders, enabling new models of organization and strategy. The market for digital transformation itself is projected to grow rapidly as companies seek to harness digital solutions for evidence-based decision-making and to create more personalized experiences for their customers. Digital innovation is reshaping the very fabric of commerce. New technologies make it possible to conduct transactions faster, more securely, and with greater efficiency than ever before. Digital transformation reduces the costs of participating in international trade, lowering barriers for new entrants and changing both what can be traded and who is able to engage in global markets. This democratization of trade has far-reaching implications, allowing small businesses and individuals to participate in commerce that was once the exclusive domain of large corporations or state actors. Today, digital trade stands at the center of global competitiveness, innovation, and economic integration. The flow of goods and services is now matched by the flow of data and digital information, creating a landscape in which physical and virtual trade routes are equally important. While the technologies and challenges have changed, the fundamental significance of trade routes endures. They remain the arteries of the global economy, continuously adapting to new realities, shaped by the push and pull of technology, conflict, and continuity. Tracing the evolution of trade routes into the modern era reveals not a story of replacement, but one of layering, each new technology and system built atop the foundations of what came before. Railways and steamships did not erase the need for ports and warehouses. Digital networks did not render physical transport obsolete. Instead, the world's trade routes have grown more complex, more resilient, and more interconnected, even as they remain vulnerable to the forces of politics and power. The journey of commerce, once measured in the slow pace of caravans and the uncertain passage of ships, now unfolds at the speed of a click or the blink of a satellite, but its enduring importance to human society remains unchanged. In a world defined by constant change, the continuity of trade endures, a thread linking past, present, and future across the shifting landscapes of technology and geopolitics.